Great.
All right, welcome back, commissioners. Mr. Burton, welcome to this august board.
Thank you, Mayor.
What we're doing is each of us will ask two questions. And the final question, I think, would be, do you have any questions for us or something? But we'll start with Commissioner Logan, and he will give the first two, and then Commissioner Dean, myself, Shirley, Reed. Very good. All right, are you ready?
I'm ready, Mayor.
Commissioner Logan, you have
Thank
the
you,
floor.
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Burton.
Commissioner.
First question deals with planning. Please tell us about your experience developing, documenting, and implementing strategic plans and succession plans. Describe how you will develop an overall strategic plan for the city and how you will develop and implement succession plans for key positions such as the city manager and department heads.
Well, thanks, Mayor, Commissioner. I think there's two parts to this question, and I think they should be separated out because they're very different. I'll first address strategic planning. When I was a graduate student intern in Al Johnson's office, the city manager of Great Falls, they were undertaking, at least in our understanding, in their first citywide strategic plan, and I helped to staff that effort on behalf of the city manager's office. And throughout my career, really practically wherever I've been in government, whether it's developing capital improvement plans for the city of Helena for the first time, or working as executive director for the Montana League of Cities and Towns and developing their first strategic plan some 8 years ago now. It's been I think, very critical part of organizational management and approach in all of the places where I've worked. I think that relative to the city of Helena, I think we're well positioned to take the next step. We have an inventory of capital improvement plans, master plans that are either completed or being worked on, fire master plan, integrated joint solid waste master plan. And so we've got a good inventory of those. And I think that when we look at a citywide master plan, that then becomes part and parcel the activity of the governing body. And, there's a public process, you can involve staff, all of that. And I think we're positioned to be at that level as a community, to where with the inventory, a good understanding of them, how do we step in? How do you step in as a governing body to bridge the gap relative to the strategic plan of the city with all that information at your disposal? And the way that I like to approach it, because it's good to be focused on strategic planning and not process, is to bring in a third-party consultant to facilitate that process. I've had great success with Dan at the local government center. He's an expert on the process, and that would be worth, I think, consideration as you step into it. So moving on to succession plans, they're difficult to do. You are never in a position, whether you're the governing body or the city manager, to say, hey, here's a training plan, and in 5 years, you're going to have this job. Things aren't that straight and linear. But I think there are many things that you can do, including working with the HR department, developing a leadership approach, a leadership-wide approach, probably consultant-driven, to actually put together the succession plan. What I think also needs to happen concurrently is developing a positive culture, an excellent work environment, keeping up with the market-based pay plan, where people want to come and work and thrive in this organization. And then you can work with people to advance their skill set and move into positions as they come available. I mean, the perfect example is Director Leland in the Public Works Department, when he started out as an engineer and worked himself up to the director position. But that doesn't take care of the plan itself. And I know that there's been discussion between and among us that maybe we should create a assistant or deputy city manager position. And those types of considerations, I think, are valid and should be well vetted as we would work our way through a succession planning process. So I think with that, Commissioner, that kind of concludes my answer. Thank you.
Second question I have for you deals with budget. Describe your approach to budgeting and budget outcomes. Specifically, do you prefer a centralized approach through one department or decentralized approach where each department takes a bigger role in their budgets? And what was the financial performance of organizations you previously managed?
Well, Mayor, Commissioner, I prefer a hybrid approach. And that means that you have to rely on the expertise of the departments to put together the budget because they're the experts in that particular arena, whether it's tying in capital plans or personnel. But there needs to be clear standards and timeframes where all of that work works its way through the finance department. And so when you're looking at multiple businesses within $109 million budget, you have to have uniformity, but you also have to have the experts be able to apply that to the request that's going to come forward to the commission. And I think that with good pre-planning, dealing with capital improvement plans early on, that everybody can fit into that. And it seems simple, but each department sitting down with the HR department, knowing who gets a step increase and actually putting that in the budget has a huge financial ramification to the outcome. And we should know those numbers up front and not be responding to them after the fact. And so that's part of the structure, but it's just one small example that could have big impacts. You know, in terms of what financial performance of organizations I previously managed, going back to being the first chief administrative officer at Lewis and Clark County, I came on board when Martha McGee was the treasurer. Mike McGrath was the county attorney. He was negotiating her resignation because the county couldn't find a cash balance. And come to find out that they had investments to the tune of $21 million in collateralized mortgage obligations, of which most of that money was school district money. So working through those issues, and you know, that was the time when Orange County went bankrupt because of collateralized mortgage obligations. So to clean that up was a very deliberate process, putting together an investment group, Alex Squillacy, and not panicking. And we ended up holding on and letting go of those investments over time and actually made 4 or 5% for the life of those investments. And at the same time, had the ability then to have a cash balance and start a budget where you know what your revenue projections and expenditure projections are. And since that time, every year, the county's received the GFOA award, and you know they've got them all on the wall in 309. When I was working for the city of Helena, we received the GFOA award every year that I was here, including this year. And so I think even though structurally there are improvements that can be made, the performance I think speaks for itself, including no issues in the audit. When I was working as the chief of staff for the governor, the budget director answered to me on a daily basis. And I don't know if you recall, but in those days, Montana was touted as probably the best fiscally managed state in the nation, with adequate cash reserves, etc. So, and then also with the League of Cities and Towns, going back to the strategic, excuse me, the strategic plan, we set the stage to increase contributions from the members, looking forward to staffing up at a level that we needed to be. And all of that was financially ready to go, and has, I think, served us very well this particular legislative session. So I think with that, Commissioner, it concludes my answer.
Thank you.
So the next question is about sustainability related to energy conservation, climate, etc. What are some of the ways in which cities like Helena can address sustainability? What would your vision for sustainability be if you were Helena's next city manager?
Mayor and Commissioner, I think first, just for this discussion, we need to recognize that there has been a culture of sustainability in Helena. And it goes back to, and I think you recall the Kyoto Protocol. I spoke about it a little earlier today. But the city commission adopted the Kyoto Protocol, and through efforts at the city level, we were able to implement the benchmarks of the Kyoto Protocol 2 years prior to the deadline. I think that's a good first step into the sustainability arena. I think too that there's been an awful lot of work done relative to acquiring water, not in terms of water rights, but also how do we use less water, even though we have access to it. You know, I think it's just interesting to note that I was also involved in Site E when we selected the landfill. And when we built that landfill, the life was projected to be 80 years. And through diversion, best management practices, the projected life of the landfill today is 120 years. And that's some 20 years later. And I think that, you know, significantly, the commission reauthorized the CCV a month or more ago. And we have staff on board, not that no work has been being done. As a matter of fact, we're preparing a report for the commission as we speak. But I think it's important now to review the resolutions that were passed and forwarded on to the commission. In an earlier meeting today, they were described as aspirational. I think we need to test them relative to, are they realistic, achievable, and measurable relative to the goals? It's the perfect opportunity for the city of Helena to develop a sustainability plan that, again, that would be a strategic plan with a specific focus, much like the CCIP is, with goals and objectives. And of course, that would be presented and approved by the commission after much vetting. So I think that there is a lot of opportunity. I think we're well positioned to bring this to the forefront. And I think it's also worthwhile saying, hey, we've done some good things in the past as well.
Great, thank you. The next question is regarding housing. A lack of affordable housing is a significant issue facing Helena and Montana. What is your philosophy and approach to development and infrastructure needs?
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioner. I've been at many points throughout my career, including when I was hired as the first supervisor of the home program and created the first statewide housing, comprehensive housing development strategy, which is necessary to access home dollars. And of course, that's still a requirement today. Developing to sustainable standards would be developing to city standards. City sewer, water, solid waste, emergency services, etc. And I know that we talked in an earlier interview how the 1 acre well and septic issue is really problematic. And the science is in on it. The density is unsustainable. The water rights issues are very concerning, particularly if you're like the city of Helen and you're a senior water right owner. And the wastewater issues are measurable. And clearly through EPA and DEQ, there's demonstration that the Lake Helena watershed and many watersheds through Montana are being negatively impacted by that development pattern. So that brings us back to the infrastructure that's available through the city of Helena and other municipalities. I think that it's also critical that we continue to develop and sustain our strategic partnerships, particular not only to development and infrastructure, but also the experts in terms of affordable housing. Helen is thinking forward with the Housing Trust Fund. We know that Rocky Mountain Development Council does excellent work in the affordable housing arena, as does Habitat for Humanity, the YWCA, God's Love, the Friendship Center. But that we also know that there's an unmet need out there that we have to continue to grapple with, whether it's our ability to leverage state and federal funds and partner with the experts, our strategic partners. But I'm a true believer, back to the question, that my philosophy is that development needs to happen at a sustainable standard. The only place that you can find that in Helena Valley is within the city of Helena. So we need to be able to grow and expand our ability to serve the area.
All right, Mr. Burton, we're moving on to business partnerships. What has been your experience working with business groups, organizations like our Downtown Helena Initiative and the Business Improvement District? Do you have a prior experience working with tax increment financing in urban renewal districts?
Well, thank you, Mayor, Commissioners. So for my whole 9.5 years, plus my last 11 months, I've been working with the Business Improvement District, the Downtown Helena Inc., the Montana Chamber, the Chamber for the City. And we've always, these are critical strategic partners as well. And, whether it's proposals to redo the walking mall, build a stage, or streamline the events permitting process. We've been working with those folks to help them promote downtown or complete their mission. When I was at the League, I worked with the executive director of the state chamber. And between the chamber and the League, what came out of that was the creation of the Montana Infrastructure Coalition, which is still in place, very effective. And we put it in place because gas tax revenues that benefit cities and counties for investment into improvements of roads haven't been raised in over 30 years. We were able to significantly raise them and improve more roads. There's still more work to do. But the Infrastructure Coalition, the other beauty of that is oftentimes the folks that are members of the coalition opposed municipal legislation. And part of the guiding principles to the infrastructure coalition is if we can't protect our base budget, then how can we invest in new infrastructure down the road? So now we have a bunch of partners that understand local government finance. They help us protect the base budget and then also work toward increasing gas tax, or how do we allocate the CARES money, or what are we going to do in terms of the competitive process that the state put together, and they've been excellent partners in that regard. Have I been a member of developing TIFs or managing TIFs? Yes, I have. I was actually on the TIF board before we sunset the downtown TIF district. That was at the time that the Great Northern was being approved and built. There were TIF investments into that. In working with our partners at School District 1, there was significant investments into building exploration works. And at the same time, the master plans were taking place for the tunnel by Great Northern, the development of Centennial Park, the improvement of Memorial Park, and still working on it, the eventual construction of Centennial Trail. So all of that ties together. And obviously, we've brought some proposals from various TIF districts in front of the commission in the last 11 months as well. So Mayor, that kind of concludes my.
Thank you, sir. Oh, geez, okay, I still got one more. Commission relations. Describe your experience and approach to building trust and credibility with a commission, board, or similar entity. Please describe how you maintain relationships and continuity with commission or board members when there is a turnover due to term limits or elections, and your approach to building consensus with a divided board or council.
Well, Mayor, I've several years of experience working for commissions, the county commission, the city commission, and the Montana League of Cities and Towns, which is a board of directors from elected people around elected municipal people from around Montana. You know, I think that in terms of building trust and credibility, you need to do what you say you're going to do, and that follow through becomes critical. I mentioned today, and it was in an earlier interview, but I've had a past city commissioner say, Burton, the best thing I like about you is that you do what you say you're going to do. And the other thing that upsets me quite a bit is that you do what you say you're going to do. So it kind of depends on where you're at with the issues, right? But I think that you know, building relationships of trust and credibility, we're all on the same team. We have different roles, and I think it's not unrealistic to expect the city manager to fulfill their role at a high level on a consistent basis, so that when you come in to make a decision, you're well informed and that you're perfectly comfortable voting however you vote. And I think that requires good structure, well thought out structure that is worked through with the commission as to what works for you. Not all, but most of you have jobs outside the city, and you have pressures. So when you show up, it should be predictable in terms of how much time you're going to spend here, and that the time that you do spend here is well spent. You know, I was a part of the group that started the administrative meeting, and Kay McKenna was a part of that with the city county joint love-in, they called it, when Kay McKenna was the mayor. And the whole purpose of those two meetings is to make sure that the governing body, outside of a public meeting where you had to make a decision, had the time to digest the information and formulate a position before you had to go across the hallway and vote. And I think both of them have stood the test of time. And I think that that's part of a good structure. In terms of elections, and we don't have term limits, but people deciding not to run, there's turnover. And in the past, I think, we had an orientation packet that was put together. We knew that probably every 2 years we may have to use it. There was always a meeting after an election and when people were sworn in, when we would review the charter and talk about structure and process and how this all works. And I've seen it enough times to know that, if you haven't been a part of it in the past, it's usually more complicated than it appears on the surface. And so that orientation becomes very important. And it just needs to be a part of our regular schedule. And nothing out of the norm. And I think too, it also presents an opportunity. And I'll speak to it here relative to building consensus. My approach to building consensus would be to ask the 5 of you if you want me to be involved in building consensus. Typically, we go through our process, and if I'm comfortable and you're comfortable with it, you're well informed, you go across the hallway and you vote your conscience. And that might be 5-0, 4-1, or 3-2. But building consensus is a whole nother matter, because that then means you're asking that you get all 5 of you in some similar position. And I would want your permission to do that. And part of that speaks to the fact that some of you are talking about updating the bylaws that govern the commission. And I think that would be a very good exercise, because you find yourself in a position, and I have found myself in a position as a city manager where it's time when the governing body needs to govern itself. And you're the only authority that can do that. So I draw a distinction relative to the consensus approach, that if that were a goal of the commission, then I'd want to be asked or invited into that discussion.
Roger that.
Right. Mr. Burton, please describe your change management process and the outcome of significant organization changes you implemented. Include an example of how you were able to overcome resistance to change.
So cities evolve. This city is completely different than the city it was 20 years ago. The population's different, the staffing's different, the laws are different, the financing is different. So you have to, part of our obligation when we decide to serve is that we really need to be looking 20 and 30 years into the future, because if we're not doing it, nobody else is. So that as a baseline means that change management happens every day. And the better that we can look into the future, the better we're going to have a sustainable water supply or a water treatment plant that treats to present day standards, or growth policies that allow for the expansion of infrastructure and the sustainable development of housing and affordable housing. The approach I've taken throughout my career, and that involves the whole team. I think it's important to note that, well, and I can talk about that later on in question 9, but there is a problem-solving model that I've applied for decades, and it works. It appears more simple than it is. And in fact, it's very difficult but I'll just outline it, and I probably have before. But you identify the problem or the issue. And critically important, then step 2 is you define that problem or issue. And if you get that definition wrong, it's going to send you down the wrong road. And that's usually a collaborative process, a bunch of smart people talking about how we're going to do something. And we can apply that to sustainability. We can apply it to affordable housing. And we can apply it to change management on a consistent, regular basis. The third process, after you have a clear definition of where you want to go, is to review your options. It's really not unlike the process that the committee's going through right now on the fire master plan. We're at the definition stage with options, and we need to engage the governing body relative to that definition, reviewing the options. And then the next 4th step would be that you select the option or options. And then the 5th step is you implement it. And the part that sometimes gets forgotten in government is that you have to also monitor and adjust, because we don't always get it right the first time out. So in what I've learned is that bringing all the parties that have a vested interest together through that structured process, the opposition usually goes away because they've been a part of building the potential solution. And it actually works very well. Sometimes it gets bogged down, like any process, but it's a good framework, and I've achieved excellent results over time. Overcoming resistance, I think part of that's the structure and bringing the right people to the table. And the question also speaks to organizational changes that I've implemented. Relative to organizing county public works, or reorganizing the public defender system that answered to me back in the day. Looking at open space acquisition, and then all of a sudden we have a bunch of property that we've never managed in the past. How do you put together an open space management plan that required staffing to actually do the work? Or overcoming opposition. It was just across the hallway where the Clean Indoor Air Act was passed, and with no exemptions. And we had preemption at the state level. We had a lot of opposition. It's not an organizational change, it's a cultural change. And 4 years later, we were able to put the preemption issues behind us at the state with a delayed implementation. And I think all these years later, I'm not sure that anybody would want to go back to what it was before. So I also think that we need to know our history, because we learn from it. But if anybody's looking back in time and thinking that's where we ought to be, they're probably going to be standing there alone. Because like I said, cities evolve. The whole nature of what we do, the laws that govern us, the financing, people, all of that changes over time. And our day job is to be looking 20 to 30 years into the future. So, Mayor, I think that concludes my answer for Commission.
Thank you. Mr. Burton, question number 8. City of Helena wants to modernize, improve business processes, and to proactively address changing community needs. This includes updating legacy systems such as the financial enterprise resource planning software and improving business processes for the project planning and management, communication, data transfer, and management. Please describe your experience implementing new systems and business processes. Be specific as the systems or processes you implemented and the outcome of those efforts.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioner. So I was here when I was at the county as the CAO when the city was having problems providing IT support for the city staff. And reached out to the city manager and his team and proposed that what we ought to do is create a joint city-county IT department. And we went through the problem solving model, in fact, that I just described. And all these years later, we still have a joint city-county IT department. And it's not a software improvement, but it's certainly is improving our business processes for both organizations, and it saved us hundreds of thousands of dollars over the years. So that's one example. I also had the opportunity and the challenge when I was the chief of staff at the Department of Justice that the Merlin system was partially implemented. It was running tens of $millions over budget. And I had to take that project over. And it required that we change the whole structure of the project team, who was in charge, just the whole process of implementation and what would go relative to phases and tasks and budgets. And as we know, we brought that system online within budget, and it still serves us well today. But it was a challenge. And let's see, we've got the process taking place with upgrading the software systems throughout the city today. The commission approved the budget proposal. We hired a consultant and contracted that. I think the approach that we have going in terms of, you've received a memo relative to an update on the project. And we've got the steering committee made up of various expertise and interests across all departments. We had the kickoff meeting last week. And so I think we're moving. And I think that, we've got a organization-wide buy-in to it. We understand the need for it. And I think that we're just going to walk through the project. And it's going to be a difficult project. We're going to have fits and starts, and we might make a few mistakes along the way. But our plan is to come in on time and in budget, and have a much more usable system at the end of it. One other that I'll mention in terms of projects that I've dealt with when I was up in the governor's office, I proposed that, and this was at a time when cyber attacks were crazy and we were learning about them. And I said, let's put in a separate bill that allows the state of Montana to buy cyber insurance. And I said, well, if the legislature turns it down, at least we can point to the bill and say we tried. But they approved it. And it was a significant expense, not for the state budget, but for most. And then the DPHHS cyber break happened. And, it's just like a emergency services event, and those experts come in. We've done it before. There were tens of thousands of letters that we had to put out throughout the United States. And how do you identify and find those people? We had to protect people's credit cards. All that insurance was in place. The experts knew how to do it. We have access as a city to that same service. So I think with that last example, Commissioner, I think that concludes my answer.
Okay, on to question number 9. How would you describe your leadership style? And could you please tell us why it is important to understand your leadership style and how you determine the most effective leadership style for a particular job, organization, or situation?
So I describe my leadership style as, well, first of all, you lead by example, participatory management and a team approach. You know, I talk to our directors and I say, you know, it's easier to hire nice people up front than to have to fix something after the fact. And I think building a culture of a positive culture where people want to work and thrive is critical in terms of, and I spoke about this earlier today. But, you know, shared values of empathy, compassion, humility, good character. All of that through good leadership rolls across an organization. And then it becomes fun and comfortable to show up to work. I think I've had several jobs and I've never changed my leadership style based on a job because maybe they're similar in terms of most of my time has been spent in leadership roles in government and the values and the understanding of how to move a large organization forward has worked in all of them. So I think it's important to be myself, and that comes through on a regular basis. And I think, Commissioner, that answers the first part of your question.
Wow. Thank you. And on to our last question. Do you have any questions for us or anything you would like to add before we close the interview?
So, Commissioner, I don't think I answered the how I delegate or share authority. If you'd allow me to go back to that.
Thank you for pointing that out, and by all means.
You bet. So I think it happens daily, and it's part of creating positive culture in an organization. You know, we've had the opportunity to work together for several months. At the management level or in one-on-ones, you know, and I described it earlier today in another interview that the city manager is kind of a generalist with big picture view that represents the various priorities of the commission. There are all kinds of experts around the table, you know, when it comes time to delegation or building capacity. You'll see that I recommend that you call those people directly rather than being a middle person in that conversation. And when those items are represented in front of the commission, it's the experts that are speaking to them. And so that's empowering them and their staff on really a daily basis. So, you know, they own the issues. They, you know, we work with them and hey, this consideration relative to the larger picture, we might have to set it aside and have a discussion on that. Maybe it's just not ready to go. But it's been my experience that when you empower your people in a good culture, the results matter and they come in on a regular basis. And it goes to succession planning and all of that. It's just critical to the health of an organization. So I think that concludes my answer, Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. And with that, we will once again go back to question 10, in case you have any questions for us or anything else you would like to share with us.
No, I think it's been a thorough process, a good process. You know, we've been working together for 11 months, so I really don't have any questions. I know that you're going to go through your due diligence and make a decision whenever you get through the process. And so I just want to take this opportunity to thank you, for the opportunity. You know, the one thing that I think is important is, and it was asked earlier, why am I here? Well, first of all, it's my community. Some people asked if I would step forward on the interim process. You selected me. Then we hired 4 department heads, and in each of those interviews, they all asked, what are you gonna do? And I committed to all 4 of them that I put my name forward. And 11 months later, I'm invested. And I know where we were, I know where we are, and I think we all have a good idea on where we need to go. And so that's what brings me here today.
Thank you, sir. We appreciate you being here today, and any final comments from the commission? If not, we appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah.